time I left, and I was surprised that the non-com is still.
So I was on the interview.
Oh, you went so.
No, no, but
No, no.
the questions we asked are standard for everyone.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the question where maybe that brought to mind in his, it wasn't pointed or anything. We asked, how do you manage contention?
Okay.
So that would be general for every, and some areas are like, we don't have any, and some are like, we have this. And so, but no, it was nothing specific on, I don't know.
Playing army and handle.
I don't know anything about that.
Okay.
So the questions generally were set for every IESG every day. And then how do you manage new work, how do you manage contention, how do you manage whatever. All right, we should
Managing contention.
oh yeah.
Pretty challenging, and there is no one single answer to it. I think it really depends.
I think you're mostly just hoping people don't go, oh, just ignore it. Or people know that it might be part of it. Should we
Yeah, shall we
get
start?
the show on the road?
Yeah.
All right. Hello, hello. Welcome to Gen Dispatch. Please grab a seat. We're ready to get started. We're excited to have so many of you in the room physically, and for those of you joining virtually as well. Hopefully you can all see slides if you're joining virtually. My name is Kirsty Payne. I'm one of the co-chairs of Gen Dispatch, and I'm here with Martin. Okay, and we're here for our first joint in-person Gen Dispatch session. Very exciting times. So just a reminder, thanks for the whoop. This session is being recorded, so anything you say, it's recorded. We have, of course, the Note Well, which you will have seen many times during the IETF so far, but please note well, this is a reminder that by participating in the IETF, you agree to follow the processes and policies. You will have agreed to this when you signed up, so please note it well, and read all of these very helpful, informative BCPs. If you need any advice, talk to working group chairs or the ADs. So some meeting tips. Hopefully this is not new if you've been in sessions all week, but we'd like to go over it. For in-person participants, please make sure that you sign into the session using the Meet Echo Lights client from the data tracker. This creates an attendance list of who was here, provides a record, but also allows you to join the queue. So please note, if you stand up and you get in the queue, but you're not joining the queue on Meet Echo, we won't call your name. If you have technical difficulties joining, different question, but please join on the Meet Echo Lights client and then get up to the mic afterwards. Keep your audio and your video off if you're using the on-site version, otherwise you'll appear up here nice and big. For those remote participants, please make sure your audio and your video is off unless you are chairing or presenting, and we recommend you use a headset. Okay, these are some resources just linked off the data tracker where you can find how you can participate fully in today's session. So welcome again to Gen Dispatch, this hybrid meeting. It's great to be here. We're excited. And for the agenda today, we just have one item, the relationship between the IETF and its trust. So we have some time to bash this agenda if anyone has objections or issues to it. But we've allocated 25 minutes as time for the relationship between the IETF and its trust. And then hopefully we'll get closer to a dispatching outcome as to how the work should advance and proceed. And then we have some flex time for anyone who wants to bring issues. I'll pause so that we can thoroughly bash the agenda if we want to. And as a final reminder, please do head over to the note-taking page and help us record the excellent discussion that is about to follow. Okay, so hearing no agenda bashes, we'll just go straight to the items. We have Lars Eggert to present.
Thank you, and I will take full advantage of the clause in the meeting guidelines that lets me take off the mask as active speaker. And thanks to all of you for wearing yours while you're not actively speaking. First of all, so what I'm going to talk about here is without any dots and as an individual participant. But while I still sort of have a AD hat, thank you, Martin, for taking up the chair role. He replaced Pete Resnick, whose new role in the what did you take on for us? It wasn't RSWG. It was RSWG. Oh yeah, we just had it. Yeah. Thank you for not knowing is yes, the right answer. So thanks, Marta, for stepping. I had a really good pool of volunteers to select from. I noted everybody's name that I didn't pick for Gen Dispatch, so you might expect me to hit you up if I have future roles to fill, and I will pass your name along to other ADs, so just so that you're warned. But as I said, this document, sort of, it's a 00, it's a short one, came actually out of sort of me doing a bit of research that was sort of motivated by the trust restructuring proposal that was announced a while ago and the consultation that they had. And also, while I sent it to the Gen Dispatch list to get a discussion started, I didn't actually request time here. So the only reason I realized that I was on the agenda was that I looked at the agenda to see if there was one, and I realized, oh, but that by then it was too late for us to do anything about it, and I just decided I'm going to make some slides I'm going to present anyway. But I thought it was a bit premature to even talk about this without having a bit more email discussion first. But here we are. So that's the caveat. Can you do next slide? So as I said, right, as part of this sort of me trying to understand the trust restructuring proposal, like many IETF participants, right, I never really paid attention to the trust, other than I knew it held the assets and the copyrights, but I didn't really ever need to like bother myself with how it does that or so on. But I figured I might take this, due diligence thing, having a black dot to sort of read up a little bit. And so I looked at, sort of my feelings and sort of thoughts and what I thought the trust did based on you being around for a while. Looking at the trust website, which has the founding documents and a whole bunch of other material about the trust that describes what they're doing, right? And then I sort of my impression of what I saw the trust doing as an observer outside. And I sort of try to reconcile this, and I find sort of a whole lot of overlap, right, which is the expected outcome if you're doing this sort of thing. But I also found some sort of gaps, and I want to sort of stress, right, there's nothing critical here, right? Nothing's on fire, right? But because of these sort of misalignments, the minor ones that I found, I was sort of wondering, why isn't there a document, like I think it was Joel who wrote, I want to say 8729. So 8729 is a document written from the perspective of the IETF as an informational document describing the expectations that the IETF has for the trust in terms of the licensing under which it makes the assets available. And when I first saw the title, I was like, this is exactly the document I thought we had somewhere, and great, I'm going to read it. But it really limits itself to giving guidance or suggestions on the licensing alone. And I figured there's some other expectations that at least sort of I had about the trust that I didn't see sort of reflected on the IETF side, but I also didn't really see it over on the trust website. And I started to write some of those things down as I did this research. And that's sort of where this document came from. And I sent this to a bunch of people. So I've sent it to a few previous AEDs, previous IETF chairs, and a bunch of people on the trust, and sort of gathered some input, and I reflected some of that before I posted it, and then I decided to post it to have a discussion on the Gen Dispatch mailing list. And that's where Russ, for example, as a co-author came from, because he was one of the persons that I emailed. And I want to point out that sort of there's a reason why I picked, for example, Russ and Yari, right? Because IASA 2 changed quite a bit about the trust, because previous to IASA 2, the IAOC and the trust were the same people, and they had the IETF chair and the executive director as part of the IAOC and as part of the trust. So there's basically a one-to-one personnel overlap between the trust and what would now be considered the IETF LLC. And IASA 2 basically completely changed this model, where all trustees are now independently appointed by the ISG, the ISOC, and mostly the NOMCOM, right? But there's no overlap anymore. And there weren't even any formal liaisons or something like that defined. And I think this is an oversight. But nobody really paid attention to this during IASA 2, because there were other things that were more important. But I think it's sort of something that we might want to revisit, sort of probably informally, between the trust and the LLC, to see if we can inform ourselves better. Anyway, so that's a lot about where this comes from, right? The high level point is nothing's on fire. Next slide, please. Sort of, this is my impression of what I believe the relationship is. The document is written as if this was IETF consensus. It's not, right? This is an individual 00. And the questions are, is my understanding or my belief here like in the rough, or is it shared? And independently of that, is like, is it even useful to write this down in some form? But this is what we're here for. So the trust, in my view, is a core part of the IETF, the wider IETF, because it holds the assets that we generate and that we need to work, right? But it's not part of the IETF LLC or in a legal sense, and it was specifically set up to be isolated, right? So the IETF community and the IETF LLC as the representative can't give directions to the trust by design, right? But I would say operationally, right, they're part because they hold the assets that we require on. And also, like, I don't know if morally is the right word here as a non-native speaker, but the trustees come from the IETF community. Pretty much all of them do. ISOC appointees I would count as IETF community in the wider sense as well, right? So they are appointed by us, they come from us, and therefore, in my view, they should sort of morally want to reflect the expectations that the IETF community has on how the trust operates, unless it sort of goes against the purpose of the trust, right? So that comes first. And so that means, to me at least, that the IETF community should have an ability to express the desires we have about the trust. And I would expect sort of an openness on the trust side to sort of be open to those expectations, right? And sort of the community should have sort of some measures to secure this relationship going forward. This is where the restructuring might come in. But it also, the flip side of this is, right, this is our trust. It holds our assets. And for example, that means we need to fund it adequately so it can do the job well, right? And the people, have adequate indemnification in terms of insurance and other means, right? This is sort of the flip side of this thing. Next slide. So there's some misalignments that I found that I'm not really going to talk about even here. I think the biggest one that surprised me the most, I must say, is that the foundational documents say that the trust should publish or must publish, I forget what the word says, and this is a quote, right, procedures for the management of the assets. And because the purpose of the trust is to hold the assets and to manage them and to license them out freely, right? And so to me, this is sort of this, having these procedures publicly documented, and we can argue about the level of detail that's required, I think is sort of a key requirement for having some operational transparency. And I don't want to, so we don't have that at the moment. At least we don't have it in a way that I would call this. There's a lengthy FAQ. There's a lot of other material on the trust website, but nothing that I would, could see having that headline. And this is not the fault of the current trust, right? The trust has been around for a long time. This should have actually been published with the creation of the trust. It's part of the founding agreement. It's just never been done. And I think that is sort of makes it a little bit difficult, because if we had that, right, that would have probably been the document that I had have read, and I said an understanding of what the expectations should have been on my side. Next slide. Right, the other thing maybe is that I think the trust is sort of maybe lagging a little bit behind other parts of the IETF in terms of transparency, right? Most other groups have open meetings. I don't think that the trust does. I don't think they would say no if somebody says, can I like listen in, but like formally they're closed. There's these operational guidelines I think are missing, and I think it would just be helpful if the trust would follow other parts of the community and sort of being open, maybe having office hours, maybe presenting or emailing out information a bit more freely, and that email is cheap, right? And I think I've discussed this a bit with parts of the trust, and often there's nothing to report, right? And we can have an argument about whether sending an email that says nothing new over here is really all that useful. I'm maybe of the fringe opinion that would still useful, so I know nothing's going on. And likewise, right, the LLC office hours that I go to as a board member, rarely people show up. So it often feels like, why do we have them? I still think it's important to schedule them just in case, right? And I think that I want to suggest that the trust might do the same thing. Next slide. I think it's the last one already. It is. So that's sort of where this document comes from, and that's sort of what it tries to do. So it tries to write down what are hopefully community expectations on what the trust should do. it's currently an individual document from me and Russ, right? And the questions are, this is even a useful document to try to produce. You know, is the, and if it is, right, is the current document, the current content even a good starting point? Or if, you know, we want to have a document like this, should it start from somewhere else? And the thing I didn't put on there is, right, you know, I can say how many times I want that I'm, you know, doing this as an individual. I still happen to be IETF chair. So if somebody else wants to hold the pen on this with Russ, I'm very happy to not hold a pen. As I said, it started out as my personal notes, and that's why it's my draft now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we've got a few people who've joined the queue. First up is Barry Lieber.
Hi, this is Barry Lieber. I think other than tweaking the tone a bit to make it clearer in the document that it's not adversarial, it's basically a good starting point. And for the dispatch question, I think it's probably simple enough that it doesn't need a working group, and it could just be AD sponsored. If it's going to be AD sponsored, probably better to have another community member other than an AD being co-author. And I had a quick question. What's the status of reincorporating the trust in Delaware or wherever that is? And John can answer that.
That's a question for the trust, right?
Keeping in mind that I am no longer a trustee, it's about halfway through the process. They have filed the incorporation papers with the state of Delaware. There is some minor glitch where the state of Delaware says no trust is a magic word, so you have to call yourself the IETF Intellectual Property Corporation or something like that. And so the next step is to go to the IRS and reconstitute the tax exemption, which is administratively straightforward, but they're totally backed up. And then once they do that, then there's more mechanical stuff of moving stuff from one place to the other. And they just got their liability tax bill, which reminds us of why it's important to do this, because the trust currently is basically uninsurable.
Right.
Okay.
John, did you want to take your turn now, and I'll wait for you since you were just at the mic? Ted Hardy, from the dispatch perspective, I actually disagree that this could be AD sponsored. I think it either needs to be managed by the trust as a working group / mailing list under them, or it needs to be a full-fledged working group that we invite the whole community to, because as it stands right now, in addition to the assets that the IETF has for it, there are other assets in the trust now, including the IANA assets. And so I think it would need to have a level of openness either at the level of the trust itself, or one where we could say there's a full-fledged working group, y'all come. I think if we do AD sponsored, that's a little bit too inside baseball for some of the other people who might be.
Can I ask you a clarification follow? So you saying that, do you, so this tries to set the expectations from the IETF community perspective. Do you think this should be broader and talk about expectations of other stakeholders that have their assets in the trust? Because that would be, for example, the IANA, right?
So I think your document isn't as clear about that scope as you may think it is. And the first suggestion to have it be the trust that runs this, although it's tying a burden to their backs they may not want, means that they could open it up to the full set of stakeholders if they wanted to. If you want to limit it to the IETF's expectations, some of your document has to go. So for example, you currently have in your document that you think the IETF ought to be the one that's in essence, the primary funding agency for it. There's a good bit of legal hindrance to that in order to meet the public support test for a 501c3, independent of the 501c3 that is the ISOC and IETF LLC, and it has to be independent because of the way the original settler documents are. If it's an independent 501c3, it has to meet the public support test independently, which means it can't get all of its money from one place. And it would be better if it actually had the other communities that are stakeholders participating in the fundraising.
So I think there are differences of opinion about this. But that might be going into too much detail for this discussion.
This is not the
but I want to point out that sort of I think because the trust is mostly holding the IETF IPR, and it's calling itself the IETF trust probably for that reason. And in the IANA assets were added sort of as an afterthought in the wrinkle of the, you know this better than I do.
Yeah.
But I think therefore, right, it's the IETF community's sort of obligation to fund it. And if the trust requires a diversity of funding to land in their accounts, that is fully fine and understood. I believe it's then up to us on the IETF side to generate that for them.
So well, let me go back to the very beginning and say I'm not wearing any hats, because that lets me put on a hat for a moment. I have in previous jobs been one of the people who went and got money from my company to give to the trust. And there, I don't think there was any confusion about which one was the trust or which one was IETF, the Standards Development Organization, but partially because there was somebody sitting there to explain it to them. So if your argument is that members of the IETF community ought to do that, I'm totally in agreement with you. That's not how I read your document right now. And I think the dispatch problem we're trying to deal with is who has to answer that question. And I think the community that has to answer that question is big enough that I would not argue for AD sponsored. I would say either the trust needs to do it as across stakeholders, or if the IETF needs to do it for itself, what it can say is, and we encourage any member of the IETF community who's got some pocket change to put that pocket change to a good cause by helping out the trust and contributing to their public support. That's a cool thing for us to do for a related organization, but we have to do it recognizing that it is an independent organization and must remain so.
Correct, and I'm not disagreeing with your recommendation for the dispatch outcome, right? But I think for the money question, right? Remember the IETF community charged the IETF LLC with fundraising and specifically hiring a fundraiser. They were sending out into the immediate community of the IETF, right? But also like far away to like get us money. And I would not want to make her job more difficult by having two entities that have the same four letters in their title asking around for money at the moment. Within our small community, like with you graciously funding both of these things, you understand the difference. As we go further from the IETF, I'm not sure this is true. And I also think that the community expressed that they expect the IETF LLC fundraiser to fundraise for the broader IETF. And we, you know, I mean, this is a discussion that we have differences of opinion on, and that's reasonable. But yes, it's a wrinkle in this where it's my opinion, and if that's not carried by the community, it will need to change. In the document.
So I think you could have a couple of different opinions there, but as long as what you are saying is you think the IETF LLC got a charge to raise money for a related institution, then we agree. That doesn't mean, however, that it's raising money that can pass through the IETF to reach the IETF trust.
Correct.
Because that's what causes the public support.
Yeah, so maybe I try to be subtle in my wording, but so I believe it is on the IETF LLC or the IETF community to orchestrate a stream of funding that arrives at the trust in a way that lets them pass the test. Okay. And if that means it needs to go there directly, that's what it means, right? But it is still, I think, the obligation of the IETF LLC to make that happen so it doesn't interfere with the broader fundraising that we do for the organization and for the meetings.
Okay. I'm just going to go back to the dispatch question because there's a long line here. I think this level of rat holing right away indicates to me you need a working group or an IETF trust mailing list for those of us who actually want to go play with the rats, to go talk in that doing it in any existing list is probably not going to work. Thank you.
I mean, immediate reactions, if it needs a working group, it's probably too difficult a conversation to have. And maybe not doing anything is better, but anyway, I might change my mind on this, but
I am back. Yeah, and again, I'm not a trustee, but I was a trustee for 6 years. And when I look at this document, I see a lot of it is perfectly fine. Like, and it's sort of minor administrative oversights that are easy to fix. Like the reason that there is no expense reimbursement policy is that they've never reimbursed an expense. So yeah, but that's easy to fix. Some of it is just weird. Like the thing about the high security module is there is no high security module. There never was a high security module. And I'm kind of surprised that Russ didn't know that. so AMS tells me. Okay, but I am concerned that there are, particularly with the issue of the licenses. I mean, even though like there didn't used to be an asset register, now there is an asset register, and even though the asset register only has like 12 things on it, okay, that actually is an accurate description of the licenses we have. And the reason is, the reason the trust was invented is that until RFC 3978, every RFC is what's known in the copyright world as an orphan work. We don't know who owns the rights. We don't know who might claim the rights. And there is no practical way, short of hiring a lawyer and paying them thousands of dollars, to determine the right document by document. So the point of 3978 and the point of the trust is basically we have this foul swamp here, and then we built a dike. Okay, and everything since we built the dike, since 3978, everything since then, we have the rights, and the rights are what the RFCs say, you know, and each RFC applies. Okay. So stuff before that, as Joel said, we made some effort to go back to old authors and have them give us licenses. And we have since discovered that our executive director was kind of sloppy about that. And it would make sense to go back to the people we can still find and say, could you redo those licenses? But beyond that, I mean, like if you want to list, I mean, truly a list of what rights do we have is like before 3978, we don't know. And since 3978, it's what the RFCs say. So my advice is perhaps more complicated than you would like. Okay, one is I think this document can be fixed, but I think you need people with more trust and legal experience. And if you want me to do it, I'm happy to help, and if you want other people, you can. But I also think it would be useful to have a companion document that describes for engineers how the trust, which is essentially a legal organization, obtains and preserves the rights to our documents in a way that turns out to be totally unique. We are so lucky that George turns out to be like the world's most skilled lawyer. Okay, our process.
I just wanted to, so when you say the word's totally unique, that really means you need to write it down.
No, we did write it down. It's in the RFCs. Okay, but I think, yeah, a non-normative descriptive document about how this allowed. I mean, we're the only SDO in the world where you can show up and write text that ends up in a standards document. Everywhere else, you need to sign contracts and have your lawyers approve it. So I think, you know, so my advice is this is fixable with advice that has sort of to separate the fix the process stuff versus stay away from stuff that could get us into legal trouble. And then a separate thing could be used, I think would be useful to say how our process enables the IETF to work in its unique way.
Right, and it does work, right? I want to reiterate that, right?
Yeah, no,
especially post the creation of the trust, we have the process is very streamlined. There's an automatic intake and an automatic copyright that goes back, and so that is all great.
Yeah.
Right. I think sort of it might be sort of a misunderstanding of my part, but when I read the words asset registry, so what I think we have at the moment is an asset type registry. You have basically a bunch of barrels and they're labeled like pre whatever the number is, post whatever the number is, badges, logos, recordings, right? So there's buckets, and they say this bucket is licensed under this thing or unknown, right? Yeah. But it's not an actual register where you see what is in it, right? And I had a discussion earlier with some other trustees where, like, I asked for, like, as an example, were the badges, right? And it turns out that the list of badges is actually on an IETF.org website. And if that is the register that the trust is using to keep track of the badges, that should be reflected by the trust so that the IETF knows that you are charging us with keeping that list current, and we will do so. But I thought, maybe naively, that you would do that as the trust, right? Because that you're the organization that actually holds these assets.
I'm not keeping in mind that until I showed up, there was no asset register at all.
Right. So
I think the asset register could be improved, but I think we need to understand that, you know, it's going to grow from 12 entries to 40 entries. It's not going to grow to 9,000 entries.
And that is a fine thing. And yeah. I fully agree that the trust has immensely improved over the last few years, right? And maybe I should have said that in the document, but I will say it now, right? I'm not at all saying that the trajectory hasn't been incredibly good going, you know, forward from the last few years, right?
Point of order.
Yep.
I think you guys are actually not dispatching at this point.
Yeah. Anyway, so
all right.
Yeah, so basically, so to summarize, I think we should dispatch it, but with more assistance from people who are familiar with it. So
you want to dispatch me some co-authors? That's what I hear.
And, you know, and I think we need this other document that is, you know, I would not call it IETF licenses for dummies, but something like that.
Would you call it operational guidelines for asset management?
Yeah. Well, the only reason I couldn't use for dummies is I don't think my publisher would license me the trademark.
Leslie. Hi.
Hello, Leslie Daigle, and in the delightful position of not wearing any hats, not having any hats to wear at this point. However, the slightly less delightful position of not only having been on the trust when it was first formed, but also knowing why it was created, so on and so forth. But the thing that I wanted to say was largely I agree with Ted's points. So if you want to move forward with this document, I think it is absolutely 100% within scope for the IETF to be discussing a document about what the IETF needs from the management of its of the material it's handled by its trust. I think anything that is an opinion or a perspective on how it's operating is out. This is not the venue to have those discussions. And if you need a litmus test, would you be standing here saying this is what ICANN does well and this is what ICANN isn't doing well and how they should hold their meetings? I don't think you would.
If I ever have to look into them, who knows? But don't tempt me.
Yeah, but I mean, so the point being, have the discussion with the trust, encourage the trust to have the discussions in whatever venue you think, but it's their discussion to have. But having a document that is clear about what the IETF needs from its trust makes good sense. Take all the opinions out.
Fair point. And I fully admit that there are things in there that remain from my personal notes, and they probably another revision before 00 wouldn't have been the worst thing to do, but we are where we are. Thank you. Glenn. Oh, no, sorry. Rich.
I guess I don't have to announce my name now, right? So even before the discussion at the mic before, I looked at the document and the title, and I'm like, no, this really needs a working group to actually, that's the mechanism by which we really get IETF consensus. And the other arguments that people have made, Ted, Leslie, and so on, John, reinforce that opinion. So yeah, let's spin up a working group under Jen, I don't care.
So technically, it's the last call that establishes the consensus, but I hear your point that the venue for discussion, like a working group, is probably a very helpful way of getting there without 1,000 emails.
If we have to have this discussion during last call, it's going to be the longest last call in history, except maybe PK, but yeah.
Glenn.
Hi there, I'm Glenn Dean, and I'm the current IETF Trust Chair.
Move the
Can you
mic.
not hear me?
Yeah.
I'm Glenn Dean, and I am the current IETF Trust Chair, and that puts me in a weird position of seeing the inside and the outside, but a couple points. First of all, one of the points you made was we don't do office hours. That has been fixed in IETF 115.
Yay, thank you.
We have office hours. They are Thursday at 1 to 2 p.m. Please show up. I used to do office hours when I was on the LLC. Nobody ever showed up, and I was very lonely. So please come. And it also occurred to me looking around the room here, it would be interesting to do a show of hands. I'm not asking me to do it, but how many people in the room are a current or past trustee? Because we got a lot of them in this room. We've had a grand history. A lot of people don't realize the trust was created in 2005. And because, we've had people come and go through the IOC and a lot of other people. There's a lot of trustees that have been out there. And we got a grand tradition of people being part of the community and helping there. I wanted to clarify one thing you said, Lars, and you said that the trust holds assets or holds like pictures and stuff. Technically, we don't actually hold the pictures. They're managed by whoever, just like the data tracker manages all the drafts. We hold the rights to them, not the assets. So we're not in charge of physically storing or making available the assets. We're in charge of holding the rights and then managing the licenses by which those assets are used legally. So just a bit of clarification.
That's helpful. Thank you. Stefan. I'm only missing Kathleen and Victor, I think.
Victor has a different appointment he mentioned this morning. Kathleen is not here. So Stefan Wenger, currently still sitting trustee for the ISG. One request here that would be, I think it's inadequate, as it was already pointed out, to go too deep into the content of this document. If we were, I would recuse myself, because this document, unfortunately, and certainly without bad intentions, includes statements where I would be uncomfortable to comment in public on because of the personal liability I have being a trustee. Yeah, there is stuff in there that a sharp lawyer could perhaps interpret as me not doing my job. And that would not be something I would want to comment on at all, right? So please, let's not continue substantial discussion about this thing. As for the real question here, what we are to do with this document, I would suggest this ought to be fairly heavyweight if you really want to continue with it. Fairly heavyweight, meaning working group, perhaps something like that, perhaps with official liaison over to the other stakeholders in the trust that are not part of the IETF organization, even if they are informal channels. And I know that this is not the way the IETF normally works, but in this particular case, I would rather suggest doing something rather heavyweight. The alternative is not to do anything about it. And quite frankly, we're not deaf. Yeah, this document is there, right? And we listen to it. And frankly, when I was appointed, the advice that I got is the ISG doesn't want to see project reports, progress reports, don't send us anything, don't waste time on the plenaries, don't do all that stuff, right? Now, we have now a different story, that's fine, we can adjust to it, but if this draft were just going away quietly, and informal channels to the trustees were employed to, complain if you want, or to suggest, were used rather than starting up this whole machinery. That would be, in my opinion, the best way forward.
Thanks.
That don't continue.
That is good advice. And also sort of when Ted mentioned the point earlier about the working group, I was fearing that a working group might become a very heavyweight mechanism, which made me say that it might convince me to,
you don't want to do this lightweight. This is too scary stuff to do it lightweight, really.
Thank you. Alyssa.
Sorry, I didn't read this when you sent it to me before you. That's number one.
What?
I know. Number two is that I think, so I agree with the people who have said, I think you need a working group for this also, sorry. But part of the reason also is because I think the IANA IPR agreement requires actual formal communication through the CCG, because this would touch on things that are implicated by that agreement. That's just my opinion, having been involved in the drafting of that agreement. So I just think it's for the purposes of maintaining good relations with the communities involved in the other assets, I think you would want it to be kind of buttoned up process and not like, let's hand it to somebody and do it AD sponsored. I think, and I guess this is maybe just the last thing, is that I think part of some of the things that you point out reflect a longstanding greater need for more administrative support for the IETF Trust. And I think that maybe it's not lacking anymore, but it was for many years of its existence. And that's, I think, we're seeing the vestiges of some of that sort of underinvestment. And, I was one of the people who really thought that having the trust assets moved to the IETF LLC that would have kind of killed two birds with one stone. And it's too bad that we're not going down that path. It would have also, you wouldn't have had to think about the funding problem either. But now you do. So that's just an observation that, it's good to get the community's requirements documented, but having the operational processes, which are documented separately and manifest separately in the trust itself, I think is actually not necessarily the more important piece, but an equally important piece of fixing some of the issues that you identified.
Thank you. Bob.
Hi, so I'm one of the, I think, many former trustees here too. I think I agreed a lot with what Leslie said. that, if this is a communication from the IETF to the trust about what it needs and perhaps isn't getting now or thinks something like that, I think that's good, but I'm not sure this having the IETF tell the trust it needs to do things differently would be the right thing. I think that will get very complicated really quickly. So this is a set of, if this is a set of requirements from the IETF to the trust, I think it's fine. And I don't think that creates legal jeopardy as far as I can tell. So, and yeah, whatever the best, I don't have a strong opinion about a working group or a list or something, but something.
Thanks. Man, that it gets shorter and then it gets longer again. Hey, Glenn.
Hi there, Glendine again. I just wanted to, just for people in the room, just to know, we've talked a lot about the funding thing, and it's not like we're ignoring it. We're having active conversations between the trust and the LLC. We're trying to figure it out. We got tax lawyers looking at things, people who know these rules very, really well are advising all of us, and we're trying to figure it out. So I think that's a really good sign that we're working well together because, we identified there's a concern and a worry, and we're working together. But I will say, I do think that we did suffer greatly during COVID because, if you look at the timeline, we did IASA. All the new IASA sort of restructuring really took place March 2019. We had, one meeting where we all got recognized, hey, we're all got these new hats. We had 2 meetings that we sort of said, okay, we're wearing the hat, we're interacting with everybody. And then we had no more in-person meetings. And I think that some rough edges there got created just because we couldn't see each other. And one of the things I found really helpful this week, this is because I was in my hotel room sick with COVID at IETF115. I didn't get to see anybody, even though I was at the IETF hotel. It's really been wonderful getting to see everybody this week and actually interacting. And I think it really helped a lot of the, like getting back into the flow of things. So
correct.
I think I guess what I'm trying to say is I think the future looks very bright.
I agree. And also I mentioned before this IASA restructuring that there's no personnel overlap anymore. COVID certainly magnified the impact of that because we couldn't even meet each other in the bar. There was always an informal way to chat that was sort of taken out, and then everybody was scrambling to just get their work done in their immediate circle, like on the ISU or the LLC board or the trust, right? And you can't really take on social chats over Zoom.
You can't. And I also want to highlight, there was another point I wanted to make and I forgot, sorry, which was one of the things that happened in ISU too is the IAD, went away because we now have a different role for that. But the IAD used to be on the trust and they used to provide a lot of administrative support. And as the trust chair, one of my first challenges was, gee, how much of this work am I going to take on? And how much of this work can I, get some other kind of staff people to work on? And that's been fun, but I think we've got to.
No, and I think that's a conversation we should continue, right? Because the incorporation will cause you some additional need for support. And so, yes.
I understand. Yes, I agree.
Leslie.
Yeah, Leslie Daigle again. So my previous comments were addressed to you on the topic of this particular document, but I felt I wanted to reinforce some points in the context of your role as the IETF chair and anything the IETF may care to take on as work. I think the discussion about whether or not there's a light working group or a heavy working group is really teetering on the edge of whether people are going to talk about what the IETF needs to have from whatever manages its trust assets versus if people really want to dig into how do you want to do the funding and how do you want to do it right. And I don't think that's an IETF working group unless you convince the trust. The trust would like to use IETF resources to have that conversation. So, again, back to we don't tell ICANN, we don't write documents to ICANN about how they should restructure themselves. Let's not do it to the trust.
So this is nothing about restructuring in this, right? And the financial thing, I left at a very high level specifically because I basically think it is the intention of the IETF community that we want to see our trust well funded, right? And that is sort of the expectations, not only an expectation that the community has on the trust, but it's also on the LLC as the financial and legal.
Yeah, the IETF requires that the trust, whatever's looking after its resources, will actually continue to exist and be viable and not subjected to whatever will not crumble in the face of a legal action. That's all fair game as a requirement. But I think that Stefan captured it well when he said that a lot of the other things that people are kind of edging into are really hard to talk about in public. And that's really not part of the IETF space to lay down requirements at this point.
Correct. And the community has delegated this to the LLC specifically for that reason, right? Correct. Mirja.
Yeah, I'm listening to this conversation, and there was a lot of times there was this word informal communication, and it's great. We should all sit together in a bar and drink a beer and like make sure we like one community. But I don't want to rely on that, and that's what has shown over the last 2 or 3 years, that if we don't have these informal channels, there's something missing. So that's my takeaway from this conversation. So this document is an outcome out of this problem, and the problem, I think, as you said, existed since we restructured everything else and forgot maybe some angle there. So I think I would like a working group to work on that problem, not only for your document, but it's maybe a slightly broader problem. And it's not like how the trust organizes itself, but it's really about this relationship between the IETF and the trust, where there seems to be something missing that we should fix.
Right. As somebody who's getting increasingly convinced that a working group would be burning a lot of energy, and maybe come up with something. So I'm wondering if a pragmatic solution would be to establish some form of informal liaison, which we can do, right? We just need to agree to do it, and we don't need to change any documents to do that, and see where that takes us.
As I said, not sure how informal a liaison is, but like I think it should not be informal. It should be formal, right? And maybe that's a completely different document. I'm not 100% sure it needs a working group, but there's something we need to fix.
When the LLC, for example, could just state that we're charging somebody with observing the trust, right? And the trust could do the opposite, and that would sort of be something like a liaison, right? Where you have people that sort of are invited to the meetings and so on and so forth. Alyssa.
I just had a question about the point that Stefan raised and Leslie pointed to around the personal liability of the trustees, because when Stefan was talking about it, I was assuming this is something that would resolve itself with the incorporation in Delaware, and therefore, should you charter a working group and have discussion about this after that point, the trustees should feel completely comfortable participating as members of the community. But then when Leslie was talking about it, it sounded like that wouldn't be the case. So I was wanting clarification around that.
So my understanding is the same as yours, that the incorporation would basically indemnify that the, I guess then directors of the corporation.
It's not quite that simple, because, of course, as a director of a corporation, you have also certain
correct,
duties,
but
right?
Be able to get insurance for you that will cover you.
We can buy insurance in that case, which otherwise we can't. That doesn't allow us just to be careless, right?
Of course.
But yes, so clearly my personal comfort level will go up by several notches the second where the non-profit corporation is actually active. Yeah, not that it started, but that basically I can say that I have withdrawn from the trust. I'm not a trustee anymore, or that whatever I say, if we have to keep the trust on the books for a few years, just for whatever weird reason, we can do that, and I can sit there. But that whatever I say, I don't say as a trustee, but as a director of the corporation. So sorry for jumping the queue, but I think that may have been helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, just a reminder to those of you already in the queue, we're going to close the queue shortly as well. We have just 10 minutes left of this session.
Okay, thanks. I'll be brief. Jason Livingood. Yeah, Jason Livingood, with my actual sort of virtual LLC chair hat on. Just for the avoidance of any doubt, like if people think that this draft in some way reflects a conflict between the trust and the LLC, that is not the case. In fact, we're taking advantage of the fact that Glenn is not sick this week, thankfully, to have a joint meeting between the two organizations face to face, which would be nice. And recent discussions we've had are things like, we have this wonderful matching fundraising agreement from ISOC. Are there ways that we can take advantage of that to sort of turbocharge any funds that people may want to give to the trust as a way to, basically double or triple funding? So That's just it at a high level. And, we are putting money in for the 2023 budget for them to help bootstrap the new structure and so on.
Stefan, were you?
So the reason why I went into the queue is basically to say exactly the same thing as Alyssa has just said. It's probably wise to finish one thing before we start another, right? And that one thing that's going on and has been going on for a year is this restructuring that's well on its way, that will be finished at some point, and then we can start another construction. But unless someone really thinks that the two things are directly interrelated, which is not what I heard here, let's finish one project first before we tackle the next. Thank you.
Thanks. There's an empty queue.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess you are charged with the
Yeah, so well, I've definitely had a lot of interest from the community. Thanks everyone for your questions, participation. It sounds like there's a call generally that this shouldn't be done by AD solely, and if it goes forward, would need a working group, some discussion, or else the document can change. In either case, the document needs a revision to be clear on what is and isn't out of scope if you wanted to take it forward. So that's what I heard.
I mean, this was helpful. Thank you for forcing me to show slides. So my sort of takeaway is that I will basically let this lie for a while. And so you might expect I'm around all week. If you want to talk to me about any of this, please feel free. I'll be at the reception tonight, for example, hanging out and looking at art, and we can chat. Personally, I understand that if people want to do this, a working group would be the right thing, but I also think it would be a very complex thing to take on, and I wonder if it's worth it. And I personally certainly feel that I don't have the time for it, frankly, and I also think I'm in a role where I can't do this, or I shouldn't do this. I probably shouldn't have written the document, but I happen to have notes. So I'm basically sort of letting this lie for a while so that we can all like have a think or something and can chat for a little bit, and then we can figure out if there's energy to do something, or if not doing anything is also a fine thing. We'll see. But thanks for the feedback, and I'll see you. Of course.
I would like to say officially for the trust, represent with my hat on, we do want to hear from you. So like, process aside, we really, really, really do want to hear from you. So talk to us. Open hours, we're there. I'm around. Other trustees are around. Or send us email. We're friendly.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Lars, for coming to present. Like you say, a good forcing function to give you time on the agenda. That did move forward considerably faster than the time it would have taken on the mailing list. So we just say thanks to everyone that gave your opinion and your view. Thanks for keeping the conversation productive as well. We do have some flex time and time for any other business if there's anything anyone would like to bring to the mic. Going once, going twice. Okay.
Hi, Lars Eggert, as Gen AD on an unrelated issue. So you probably saw that we did a PR action announcement, and it had a last call discussion that was pretty long. One point that was brought up during this last call discussion, that there's a significant number of people, I would say, not a few, but quite many, that suggested that BCP 83 and maybe the broader moderation mechanisms and process that we use in the IETF for our participation channels need a rethink, right? And so if people have energy to take that on, this would be something that would be dispatched here, right? I would encourage that if we start that, we start with a bunch of people that maybe met in a bar or somewhere else, come with a, I want to say fully fleshed out proposal, but at least something that can be read and discussed about to some detail, rather than like starting with an email or something like that. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And Bron, you're in the queue.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to talk about that here, and I had a clash, but thankfully my session finished on time, so I've snuck up here to dive in. I definitely think there's some work to be done in this area, particularly around saying that maybe some of the forms of communication that have been used in the past on IETF lists, while they are part of English are not necessarily the best forms to use for communication in a global audience that we have. So particularly some of the forms of humor and sarcasm, that kind of thing. If we say they are not recommended, and if someone points it out that the correct response is sorry, my bad, rather than I have a right to communicate in this style, is a good path to work forwards from on that. So I'm definitely interested in being involved in the discussions on this. I think it's work that we need to do.
Sounds dangerously close to volunteering there, Bron, to write such a proposal.
I know.
Okay.
I'm just volunteering to go to the bar.
Great, super. Well, there you go. That's an offer from Bron. He'll be in the bar. Okay, so with 5 minutes left, we just say thank you. Thanks again to Martin for co-chairing and to Pete for all your service. We miss you up here, but I think Martin did a great job the first time. So thank you for co-chairing, and we'll just let you go. Yeah, enjoy your break. Thanks, everyone.
Can I, if I'm displaying the slides, can I switch and take notes in parallel?
Yes. So it's actually working through this, and it's knowing, because you're using this, it's reading all the Meet Echo stuff from here. So whatever you share here, it knows.
Okay, but then I need to switch back if I want to switch the slides.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, but typically the slides are gone when you type in.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. Okay, sorry, well, I took notes.
Okay, that's really
I'll
great.
see, but hearing you typing, I'm pretty